One word to describe periods. Uncomfortable.
Why God created me to have periods?
So invasive. Sometimes I want to wear my new white jeans and I can't.
It's not nice. Maybe you're having some cramps.
I am a mother of a 2-year-old. So when I get my period, it's like, woohoo! Someone would understand.
Sometimes it even embarrassed you.
My friends, I'm not really sure how they deal with it because we don't usually talk about it.
Why do you think it makes you down?
It makes me down because of I don't have the fortune each and every time to have money to buy pads, and my mother is not working, so and then at home we are all females, so if I have one, automatically I have to share for everyone.
Yours is very expensive. Maybe if I don't have, I'll go and ask my sister if she have one, or go to my friend's place and ask. The others, they're using toilet papers because they don't have money to buy pads. The clothes.
Newspaper ever?
Yeah, even the newspapers.
So women go through cyclical bleeding for most years of their lives, starting in the early teen years to middle and old age. Whilst for some women this might be accepted as part of life, for some there are times when this experience might not be pleasant at all. So how much do we know about what women go through during these bleeding episodes and why? Well, stay tuned because today we discuss the female and bleeding. We have an expert guest panel that will help us unlock all aspects of menstruation, challenges of the bleeding in the young female and the older female, and causes of some of the abnormal uterine bleeding. Now this panel is comprised of 2 specialist obstetricians and gynecologists, one from Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital and the other one from Netcare Park Lane Clinic. We also have a lady who's going to share with us her story of unpleasant experiences of bleeding. Please tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply just interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Sit back, relax, and learn from this bumper show, coming to you just after a short break. I'm Dr. Sello Mutaung, and this is Health Talk.
This story is about what happens when we put our differences aside and we come together as a human race.
Salt makes its way out of the kitchen into the art studio.
Normally, salt is for food and stuff, but then here's salt.
Past couple of months, I've grown so much, and I'm just ready to impart what I've learned to the next Miss South Africa.
I wasn't expecting this. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm feeling so overwhelmed.
For your weekly dose of entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
What guides us? Is it something you can touch, hear, feel, or see? What leads us onto greater experiences? Is it leaders on a soapbox, spouting rhetoric for the crowd? The advice of our elders? Or is it the actions of our people? The strength of our beliefs? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people, and your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
What are women's experiences when it comes to menstruation?
Normally I have pain and nausea and headaches and back pains. So it's not a good experience for me. Like I feel like I could be a man simply because of that reason.
When I started having periods, like it wasn't painful at all.
the first few years, but like now they've become like very severe. Like the first day it's very painful, and I become very uncomfortable. Like whenever like I'm walking around, I feel like everyone can see that I'm on my period.
I go through extreme pain. I don't know, like I roll over on my bed.
Are women free to talk about menstruation with partners or family members?
I do talk about it, but I know there's no cure for it.
I've told my mother, I've told like everyone, my sisters.
My partner, yeah, when I'm in pain, like sometimes he gets me pills, but like I don't really drink pills, like honestly.
Those who go through period pains talk about all forms of cures.
I use pain blocks and using hot water with onion, but it doesn't help. It only helps for 2 seconds, and then after that it doesn't.
Painkillers.
Whenever I'm in pain, I just keep myself busy. I clean, do the laundry, whatever, like just to keep my mind off the pain, you understand?
And then I have to like make a plan. I always drink Dysmenorrhea to help with the pains, and yeah, I feel better in like no time. They actually last for like a day, not for the entire cycle.
All right, so let's learn more about what these young women are talking about, this problem of bleeding. And with me in studio to help us, unpack all of this is two very special ladies. They both specialist gynecologists. One is based at Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital, and the other one at Park Lane Clinic, Netcare Park Lane Clinic. Now, the first one, closest to me, is Dr. Lusanda Shimange Matsuse. Now, she is founder of My First Gynae, and she's very passionate about women's health issues, and she's also taken gynecology to social media. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And then next to her, of course, is Dr. Malipule Msebeku. Now, Dr. Malipule, I can confirm that fact that she's very, very passionate about cycling, and she's also passionate about women's health issues and has, keen interest in laparoscopic surgery. Welcome to Health Talk, Dr. Malipule.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So let's start at the beginning. We hear of this term menarche. What is menarche?
Menarche is a very big word that basically means it's the first time a woman or a young girl gets her period. So the first time a young girl gets her menstruation is known as menarche.
All right. And what sort of ages does this happen?
So it's basically a range. The ages that we're looking at is between the ages of 10 and 16 years old. So by 16, a girl should have gotten her period. After that, we consider it pathological and we have to look for causes. And before that, it's known as is precocious puberty, if I can put it that way. But we do have girls having their first period at the age of 9 years old. So between the ages of 10 is more of a 10 and 16 is more of a acceptable range.
Okay. Dr. Malipule, I mean, this can be quite an experience for a young girl, experiencing this first period, and perhaps not even only for the young girl, but for people around her. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very interesting how a young girl experiences the first period is very much affected by her expectation, and that is very much affected by the attitude of the people in her life, her community, her society. So we find that you have a young girl whose family is quite open and actually views menstruation the way it should be, as a perfectly healthy process that actually should be welcomed, that it signifies that you are healthy and fertile. And therefore, if a girl has been taught and made to expect and look forward to a period, when she experiences and sees blood, she doesn't get a shocker, she doesn't get scared, she doesn't panic. As opposed to some unfortunate situations where young girls are in environments that are too conservative. Menstruation is not talked about. It is viewed as dirty, as private, or as a form of punishment, religiously even. So when in a setting like that, unfortunately, when a young girl experiences a first period, then it's quite negatively received, and it causes anxiety and happiness. And they can even feel and experience pain being a lot worse than it actually would have been if she had been looking forward to it and experienced it as a positive, perfectly natural experience that is actually confirming to her that she's a healthy woman.
And this often obviously happens when the young girl is at school.
Yeah, and also the attitude of the environment, the school, her friends, the school's attitudes, the teachers. If they're viewing it as a bad, negative, dirty experience, then she's going to want to feel, they feel ashamed, they want to hide it, they actually want to even reverse time and remain young, or they wish they were boys. It's very unfortunate, but it can be made, and it should be made, a very positive, because that's what it is actually. It's natural and it's good. It's how a young girl will get confirmation that you have developed normally. You are now becoming fertile. You'll be able to bear children, which is what every woman wants, what every family should want for their daughter.
Perhaps not young girls, but
yeah, I mean later.
But let's talk about the why. I mean, she just said that it's a natural process. We hear about the menstrual cycle. Just give us a glimpse of what this is actually is.
Okay, so as the word suggests, the menstrual cycle is something that happens on a cyclic basis.
Right.
So it occurs every month. And it obviously differs from woman to woman. And how will you know if you're having a normal menstrual cycle? It's just about keeping something basic like a menstrual diary. So basically, like I said, it happens every month, right? So normal cycle is between 21 and 35 days. What I mean about that is when you have your first period and the days in between till you have your next period.
Okay.
That is the cycle.
So right. That varies between 28 and...
Well, 28 is an average.
Right.
It's an average, but not everyone has a textbook 28-day cycle.
Okay.
Right. So it may be more than that or less than that.
Right.
And it's also about how many days the woman bleeds for. Right. So she can bleed for 3 days up to 7 days. Right. Any more than that, then we consider that as prolonged bleeding, and it's something that we might have to look at.
Okay. So what is this bleeding? I mean, why should there be bleeding? What actually happens in the womb?
So simply put, the womb has different layers, but the layer where the bleeding comes from is called the endometrium. So that is the lining of the womb. And during your menstrual cycle, you basically build up that lining. And then when you have your period is when that lining is shed. And that is just really basically explaining what happens when a woman has her menses.
Yeah. So you spoke earlier about, attitudes of people and knowledge. There's often this notion that when that lining is shed, it's actually dirty stuff that's coming out of a woman. Please just clear this for us.
Let me clarify that. Thank you. The uterus or the womb has a lining, like Lusanda has explained. We call it the endometrium. And then there's two small glands on either side of the womb of the uterus called ovaries. They produce hormones. And they produce the eggs that may not be fertilized, and that's where we all come from. Eggs that are fertilized by sperm, and we become human beings. So on a cyclical basis, one of the ovaries will release one egg, and that's called ovulation. Now this egg is then picked up by one of the tubes, one of the fallopian tubes, and it travels to the uterus. Now while this is happening, the lining of the uterus, in response to the hormones that are produced by the ovary, which is called estrogen, in response to that, it thickens up. And when it's thickening up, it's thickening in preparation for the possibility that that egg that's being released, that's being ovulated, might be fertilized, and therefore an embryo or a developing baby might need to land in a warm, nourished, with full of nutrients. So it's going to land on the thickened lining called the endometrium. Now this thickened lining, to provide the nutrients that are in blood. So this is a lining that is thickened and full of blood, but this blood is full of nutrients to feed a possible developing fetus. So that's why it's important that people understand that it's a good thing. Okay? So if, like happens in most cycles, that egg that's been released does not get fertilized. So there's no embryo, there's no pregnancy, then there's no need now to feed a developing baby. So then that lining will break down, and then we shed it. We shed it because now the body is going to make a new one for a possible baby the next cycle. And that's what it is. Which it's not dirty, it's actually good, healthy blood full of nutrients to feed a developing baby.
Right.
But when there's no baby to feed, the hormone levels from the ovaries will change and that lining breaks down and we shed it. Then we start building another one for another possible embryo the next cycle. And if it doesn't happen, we shed it. So we keep on just building a possible feeding full of nutrient lining of the uterus, and that's what it is.
Exactly. Okay. On that point, we're going to go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we now look at some problems associated with this normal menstruation as we described it. Please stay with us.
Today on Rights and Recourse, we will unpack the new Provisional Court Bill.
The idea of the bill is not to overregulate, to basically set the principles.
The most important aspect of this bill is that it understands that customary law by its nature is consensual, that I have a right to affiliate, I have a right therefore to opt in, and I have a right to opt out.
The opt-out provision is basically one that you've got to respect the court in the sense of if you've been summoned, you've got to tell the clerk of the court at least that you're not willing to attend.
The challenge that I would like to throw to the Department of Justice, it has to come up with mechanisms of ensuring that people who exercise their right to opt out or to opt in are not in any way victimized.
Hashtag Rights with Dumila Mates on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
Hello and a warm welcome to PM News, and we're broadcasting live from Johannesburg.
4 decades later, the family is still seeking closure.
We need the truth, and the truth must be told.
Children often go undiagnosed because they are hidden away. About 1 million people in South Africa live with autism.
Creative recycling at play.
Mosaic has been around forever. I just had to find a new, fresh way to put and a new spin to put on it. So I decided why not recycled cans.
Stay tuned to PM News for all your news updates every Saturday and Sunday from 1500 hours.
Something that she cannot do, there's something that she will do, so that I give her the support that she needs.
Do young men think women should talk about menstruation with men in their lives?
For women who respect themselves, like, it will be hard for them. It depends on kind of girls. Depends on who you are, and there are those kind of women whereby like they are free, like they have energy, bapapa and stuff. Like they share everything about their lives.
I don't think so.
It's not. It's easier because you guys are women. So woman to woman, it's very simple.
What about the older men?
You remember back at our primary school, we used to laugh at the teenage girls when they start to have their their menstrual cycle. So it's very difficult because of our culture. But in the modern society, I see men buying some sanitary pads for their partners. I think it's improving with education and time.
As time changes, before then it was like you can't talk about it. But nowadays it's something that like we as parents or we as men, we must be open so that our children can also be open and also talk about it. Because like let me talk about before. There was this rule that a woman cannot cook while they're in periods. But what is that? But you can go to a restaurant and buy food. How do you know that person is not on period? So it's something that times is changing. We must also go with the flow.
Times are changing indeed, and we need to know about these things. I mean, this just goes to show the level of information out there about what menstruation is. At least one thing they're getting it right is that it happens once a month. All right. So I'm with my two special guests, Dr. Malepulo on my extreme left and Dr. Lusanda, closest to me, both specialist gynecologists. Dr. Malepulo based at Net Care Park Lane Clinic and Dr. Lusanda at Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital. We were talking earlier in the previous segment. Okay, we're not going to comment on how much men know about menstruation, but we're talking about this normal period. Okay. Yes. There's obviously problems sometimes associated with, the young girl experiencing her periods. Pain. Let's talk about pain. Why should others have pain and others don't?
So the pain that you get during your menstruation is known as dysmenorrhea. Right. And there is different levels of it, and it's also on an individual basis as to how much you can actually tolerate pain. And there is that dysmenorrhea, which is actually pathological. And with that, it needs to be investigated, it needs to be treated. And the reason why women would get pain during their menstruation is the fluctuation of the hormones during their period. And also remember, the womb is a muscle, and when it's shedding, it contracts and it relaxes, and they get that sensation of that pain when the womb contracts. Mm-hmm. So not all ladies experience it, but some more than others.
So some of them, Dr. Malepulo, would say, it's normal. I must go through pain. I expect to go through pain every time. But some go to an extent of, being incapacitated. They can't do anything and they need to do. What is the reason for this difference? And at what point, should any lady out there say, I need to go and consult?
Yeah. As Lusanda said, so this pain that is almost like within normal range that happens with the period, that happens because when the lining of the uterus is being shed, to be pushed out, the uterus contracts. But what is acceptable is that the contraction is at its worst at the beginning of the period, when the lining is at its thickest. So that's why a day before or the first day, sometimes a little bit into the second day, but mostly the first day, you'll have the strongest contraction of the uterus. And women that experience that pain get to know that actually it's going to happen for a couple of hours and it's going to go away.
So they get used to it?
They get used to it. And mostly when it is that kind of period pain, which we call primary dysmenorrhea, it does not indicate that there is something wrong. There is something wrong, or a woman should suspect that there's something wrong and have it looked at. If all along you've been having a certain amount of pain on the first day, it then changes pattern. It gets more intense, it gets more severe, and it lasts longer. And also associated with it is that now it's longer, that the blood that's coming out now is a whole lot more, particularly with clots, and it's excessive. Because when now the pain is severe and is lasting longer beyond day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4 of that period, and sometimes associated with more and more bleeding with clots, then it is letting us know that it is more than just that natural contraction at the beginning. There's usually a disease process going on, and that can be an infection, that can be abnormal growths in the uterus, very commonly called fibroids. There can be also a disease that we see more and more now called endometriosis. So when there is when it's getting worse, it's changing pattern, and particularly if it is so bad that it interferes with your normal activities, it interferes with schooling, it interferes with work, it affects normal activities, exercise and all that, then a woman should go and have it looked at, because there is probably something wrong and something can be done about it.
Okay. Let's stay with the young female and move away from pain now and talk about the regularity of the periods, because oftentimes you hear young girls say, my periods are not regular. Just, you've described to us what's normal, but what would be classified as irregular?
Okay, so before I actually tell you what irregular is, it's just there's a notion out there that you must get your period on the same day of every month. Right. But we know from month to month we don't have the same amount of days. So, and sometimes ladies will think they have irregular period because they're not getting it on the 5th of the month every month. And like I said, the cycle varies between 21 and 35 days, which is acceptable. So you may either have a long cycle or a short cycle. Where it becomes an issue is if you start missing your period, right? So sometimes maybe you'll have it the 1 month and then you'll skip 3 months and then you have it again, or maybe you just stop having your period altogether. But also note that in the beginning of your period, when you have your menarche, the first time you have your period, normally young girls do have irregular periods, and that's basically your hormones in your body just getting some sort of balance, and then they become regular. So when you're having irregular periods is when you're having now missed periods, or you're having more frequent periods. So you have your period more than once in a month. Then that is considered irregular cycle. But with that being said, if you miss your period the 1 month, it does not mean now you've got an irregular cycle.
You may mean you're pregnant.
It could mean you're pregnant, but then the next month you have your period and then you carry on having your period as normal. Usually we want to look at 3 cycles before we can say, okay, you are having an irregular period. And that's why I always advise young patients, keep a menstrual diary, because people can't, and ladies, they can't really remember, not everyone can remember their menstrual cycle as it is, and that's why the default setting is to say, no, I normally get it on the 5th of every month, and then last month I actually got it on the 10th. But it just depends on your cycle, and you can only really ascertain that if you have a menstrual diary, so you can see what a lady's cycle is.
Okay. Let's talk about the amount of bleeding now. Oftentimes, some of the ladies will say, I bled just a few drops. The others would say, I bled like you'll never believe. What are the causes, and how do we deal with this different?
This is one of the things that makes our work, my gynecology, so interesting, because what you highlighted now, the different types of bleeding between women, it's one of the things that highlight that we're not the same. We are different. Some of us are short, some of us are tall, some of us have wide hips, some of us have narrow hips, some of us have small breasts, some have big breasts. That's normal variation. So it's very critical first of all, for women to appreciate that, that your sister is taller than you, your sister has bigger boobs or smaller boobs, so therefore you are not the same. So what's important is that for one to get accustomed to what is normal for me. And it's a problem if what is normal for you changes. So in response to the estrogen hormone from the ovaries that I alluded to earlier, one woman's lining of the uterus, the endometrium, might get only just a little bit thick, and another woman gets very thick. So how thick that lining gets, the endometrium, is going to determine how much you're going to bleed, because that's how much you're going to get to shed when you haven't conceived. So it may be normal for one woman, perfectly normal, to have light bleeding that needs just a panty liner for 2-3 days, and yet it's normal for another woman to bleed more that needs to change a pad every 4 to 5 hours for 5 days. That's her normal. Okay? It's if that normal for you changes. The woman who's been bleeding 3 days all of a sudden starts bleeding 7 days, who's never passed a blood clot now passes blood clots every day. The woman who used to bleed for 5 days now bleeds for 14 days, for 10 days. So it's absolutely normal, and people and young women must please accept that we are not the same.
So let's talk about those changes then, the changes in the norm. Somebody who's used to bleeding just lightly and suddenly bleeds a lot. Could that indicate some problem?
That's the point that I'm getting at, that you should focus on what's your normal, and if your normal changes, there could be something wrong. Like I said, infection, there could be growths in the uterus, polyps on the lining of the uterus, growths called fibroids in the wall of the uterus. You could have anything really. Sometimes women have had a contraceptive device put in, a loop that changes how much they bleed.
Right.
But the thing is, there could be something wrong. And also, when they bleed also, it's not always really only from inside the uterus. There could be even more serious things happening. Like you could be developing a cancer, some tumor on the cervix, you know. It needs to be followed up if your normal changes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you shouldn't expect your normal, just because it's different from your sister or your friend's normal, that you interpret it as abnormal.
Okay. Yeah. It's on that point that we're going to hold it, because when we come back after the break, we're going to talk about abnormal bleeding. Please stay with us.
The Law Society has slammed notices sent to 4 universities to jack up standards or risk losing their LLB courses. The Council on Higher Education issued a stern warning to the universities to conform within 6 months.
I think it will affect the university. I think outside the law faculty, there's a funding issue.
It's been 112 years since Enoch Sontonga died as a relatively unknown composer, choir master and teacher. But today his legacy lives on through his greatest composition, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa.
For all your news updates, stay tuned to Your World from Monday to Sunday.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're talking the female and bleeding. And if you've been with us, thank you so much for staying with us. We have two special guests in our studio, two specialist gynecologists, one based at Charlotte Matlake and one based at Park Lane Clinic. And we're now joined by another special guest. It's Martha Henning. Martha is somebody who suffered from abnormal bleeding and would like to share her story with us. Welcome to Health Talk. It's Martha Henning, isn't it?
Henning, yeah.
Henning. Okay. Welcome to Health Talk. Perhaps let's start with you, Martha. You're somebody that shared a story with us, you know, just off air now, about the fact that you had a problem with bleeding. Do you mind just sharing your story with us?
Yes, I stopped my periods at the age of 53. Then it was gone. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, I started menstruating again. But it was terrible. Then I went to hospital and I asked for help, and it carried on for 2 years. Eventually, I got to a doctor that helped me.
And what? Just tell us a little bit more about, you know, your bleeding problem. How irregular is it? Was it irregular? Was
like
it heavy?
Twice a week or 3 times a week, or I was the whole month just bleed.
Yeah.
Like heavy bleeding.
Yeah.
I go through a pack of pads like a day.
And how long did it last before you went to see a doctor?
You know, the Afrikaans people grown up like you're not allowed to go to the doctors, and you're not allowed to have a doctor scratched. So eventually I decided for myself, I need help. I need help drastically. Because I didn't go anywhere. I didn't socialize because I was always worried somebody's going to see this.
Yeah.
Because if I tell my friends, I'm at 54, I'm still got my periods, they're like, no. Then I say, yes.
Right.
I've got a problem.
So at this point you then went on to hospital?
Yes.
Is that where you got help?
Yes.
Just tell us a little bit more. What did they say is wrong
I
with
went to
you?
Edenvale Hospital.
Right.
And then they said the surgery is too big there. They can't help me. Then they referred me to Charlotte Maseke Hospital,
Right.
Joburg Gen.
Right.
And there I got help.
Okay. What type of help? You had an operation?
Yeah. First they did the biopsy.
Right.
And then the biopsy came back and I couldn't see anything.
Right.
Then they did a scope for me and they also couldn't see what was wrong. And then eventually they operated.
Okay. Very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Now, folk, I'm going to read an email that we just received from somebody that was supposed to be with us, but sent us an email to share her story with us. And if you just bear with me, I'm going to read this. It says, "Good day, my name is Kabitwa Nwezi. I'm 38 years old. I first had my period when I was 14 years old, which lasted about 5 days. As time went on, when I was 35 years old, my period started lasting for about 7 days. All those days, I had lots of period pains, which became worse. At times, I would take painkillers like Panado, Anadine, etc. And most of the time, I used to put a hot water bottle on my tummy just to get rid of the pains. One day, I went to the clinic to explain what I was going through. Then the doctor examined me and told me that I had 3 fibroids growing, and he said I have to go for an operation. My bleeding then worsened to an extent that I started changing pads every 2 hours or less. And by then, the bleeding would last for about 14 days or more. It made me tired, weak, and dizzy. Sometimes the bleeding was so heavy that it felt like I had been poured with a jar full of blood. And there were very big clots that scared me. I was given a depot injection to stop the bleeding in order to prepare for the operation. But the bleeding didn't completely stop. Instead, there was very small amounts of bleeding until my day of the operation. After the operation, I am now very fine and strong. Glory be to God, and many thanks to the doctors that helped me." Very two interesting stories. Where do we start? Let's start with her story. So obviously, perhaps before we even get to this, the story, let's describe or define this concept of abnormal uterine bleeding. Sometimes you hear of the term dysfunctional uterine bleeding. What is it, and what's the difference between the two, if any?
So, okay, not to get too technical, the
Right.
term abnormal uterine bleeding, it's a newly acquired term because of all the confusion about what is abnormal, all the different terms that were being used, menorrhagia, metromenorrhagia, and I'm not going to get into
Right,
that.
right.
But basically, earlier on in the show, we spoke about what was normal, right? So abnormal uterine bleeding is everything else that goes outside of what we described. And what's important about that is that there are different causes. And there's structural causes and there's non-structural causes, right? So in terms of structural causes, when we look at a woman who's got abnormal uterine bleeding, in other words, has prolonged bleeding or has too little bleeding, right? Then we basically look at the female anatomy, right? Is it a polyp, like Dr. Malipole said? Is it adenomyosis, which is basically a condition in the uterus, right? And is it fibroids, like the lady in our email had said, right? Or is it a malignancy? And then there's the non-structural side of it. Does she just have a bleeding disorder that was never diagnosed?
Yeah.
Because with women, if a woman's got a bleeding disorder, how are they going to present themselves to you? Either with nosebleeds or with abnormal periods, if I can put it that way.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go on to Dr. Malipole. Now, sometimes, do we have all the answers? Sometimes, as medical people, we don't seem to have all the answers. Some people go through these periods and we just don't know what's going on.
I and myself and all of us physicians, we are scientists and we must never ever be deluded into thinking that we're God. Okay? We know a lot. There's been a hell of a lot of progress and a whole lot of things explained by research and studies, but there is no field, any corner of medicine where we have 100% of the answers.
Right.
As time has progressed, there's a lot more that's understood today than was understood 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So the fear of areas that don't have answers yet is getting smaller and smaller. But we do not know everything.
All right. So having said that and taken that off, out there, let's focus on some of the common causes.
Yeah.
Fibroids. This is quite a common cause.
Absolutely.
Right.
Fibroids are non-cancerous. The medical terminology that a lot of people will come across is called benign. That means it's a non-cancerous growth, except under very exceptionally rare circumstances. So by and large, I think for the purposes of everybody understanding what fibroids are, let's just accept that fibroids are not cancerous. The uterus, the womb, is made of smooth muscle. I like to make people understand that imagine a small bag that's been held, a small sack that's been held upside down, and it's made of not cotton, but it's made of smooth muscle fibers. So fibroids is when these smooth muscle fibers that make up normally a uterus behave abnormally. They grow independently of the other fibers and make a small ball. It's a growth, but it's not cancerous. Now, depending on the size of the fibroid, and depending on the position of the fibroid and how many there are, the closer and closer they are to the lining of the uterus, they cause irritation and inflammation of the lining of the uterus, making that lining, the endometrium that we spoke about earlier, thicker than it normally gets. And like I said, the thicker the endometrium gets, the heavier you're going to bleed. So, but that's so common that actually very many times a woman will go for a general examination and she's just going for a checkup and she's well. And we very commonly just find, surprise, surprise, there's a small 1 centimeter fibroid, there's a small 1.5 centimeter fibroid. And especially when it is far from the inside, from the endometrium, it's not doing anything, it's not causing it. So we don't always have to do something about a fibroid.
Right.
But when they cause problems, it is heavy bleeding, it is pain, and if it is right inside the cavity of the uterus, it might even interfere with falling pregnant.
And how do we deal with these? How do we treat fibroids? We hear that sometimes people talk about removing the entire uterus, sometimes you're removing just the fibroid. How are they commonly treated?
I think when we look at how we treat fibroids, you have to look at the person you're dealing with, right? And maybe long time ago, big fibroids and remove all the wound. But now, with most women, when they come and they've got fibroids, like Malabula said, it's pain, it's bleeding, or sometimes they just want to fall pregnant and they're struggling. So you have to look at what the patient wants and how do they bother her. But for the purposes of the program talking about females and bleeding, you can treat them medically or you can treat them surgically.
It's just for them, for people that experience these symptoms, to obviously go and consult.
Yes.
And a discussion will take place between the patient and the doctor in terms of the appropriate treatment. Okay, let's go for another quick break. When we come back, we now move on to the older woman to see what problems are there with bleeding in the older woman. Please stay with us.
What guides us? What leads us forward? Is it leaders on a soapbox, spouting rhetoric for the crowd? Is it the actions of our people? Or the voices of our citizens? Your country is guided by the voices of its people. And your broadcaster is dependent on your voice to guide it. Get your copy of the SABC's editorial policy and have your say.
blood comes onto the pad and then it's absorbed that way. So in terms of is one better than the other one, I can't really say. What I can say is that it's an individual basis. It's about what you prefer.
Right.
But with that being said, you can't go and wear a tampon the whole day.
Right.
That's unhealthy. Just like you can't wear a pad the whole day.
Yeah.
That's also unhealthy.
So what are the consequences?
So with a tampon, the most dire consequence is called toxic shock syndrome,
Right.
which is a bacterial infection which can lead to severe morbidity. In other words, a patient being severely unwell and possibly death. And that's why you should not wear a tampon the whole day. So at least every 4 hours, change your tampon. But with that being said, a lot of people will say, but I double up because my menstruation is too heavy and so forth. And you get different size tampons. So you need to, like Malipule said, you need to know what is normal for you. So you can't go and buy a mini tampon when you know you have a heavy period. Then you must buy a bigger tampon. And obviously, and I always say to the patients, always have a panty liner or maybe a pad for that leakage that may happen, because sometimes it may happen the most inopportune times. So it's just that extra protection.
Dr. Malipule, we hear of these cups as well.
I was going to say,
Right.
may I please add on to that,
Yeah.
most of the time what is referred to as the appropriate ways to manage a period is tampons and pads. But please, people need, more and more women and young girls and women of any age, it's important that they become aware that there is what is called a menstrual cup.
Right.
And particularly cost-wise, it is a lot more cost-effective, and it's also better for the environment.
Tell us about it.
For those of
What
us that
is it?
think
Yeah.
about environmental issues and the environmental impact
Right.
of wastage.
Right.
So it's basically as it says, it's a cup, and these cups have been designed in such a way that they fit snugly into the vagina without you feeling that there is something in there, just like a tampon.
Right.
So the materials are soft, and it is quite easy to learn to use. It's easily foldable. When you first insert it, you just squeeze it, it becomes smaller, you push it up the vagina, and when you release it, it opens up and covers the cervix, which is the mouth of the womb. And then what happens is that blood collects there, and like the frequency of changing a pad or a tampon, you will just pull it out, pour out the blood, rinse it again, and put it back in. So it's a product that actually has a big role to play in filling that gap of areas where the cost issue is a big problem and preventing many young women from getting proper sanitary care, because it's once off, you're not having to buy a new cup every period, every cycle.
I mean, there's obviously this issue, and I know that we're supposed to be talking about the older women, but I think this is important. This issue of young girls missing school because they don't have sanitary pads and so on. And what I'm hearing you say is that instead of looking at investing in supplying sanitary pads, this is a more cost-effective.
There's also a product now that is a form of reusable pad, because not all girls, particularly younger and younger girls, will be able to insert a cup, just like might not be able to insert a tampon. But it's made of special fabric that can be reused, and that takes away the costs, you see, and also environmentally friendly.
In the earlier clip that we played, there was mention of using newspapers. And what would be your advice in that instance?
The problem with that, number one, is that it's probably not comfortable, right? And number two is then when you do, how often do you change that newspaper? And how does that inconvenience your life? Where is the newspaper coming from? Is it clean?
Yeah.
You know, and we do come across patients who actually do use maybe a face cloth and and newspapers and so forth, but it's also a hygiene issue, but also yourself as a female just being comfortable. I mean, one of the ladies was like, she does not even want to go out the house because she doesn't have, and it impacts on patients going to and ladies going to school and going to work. So it's not something I'd really advise.
All right, this is an important one, but let's talk about the older female now. The lady mentioned that she stopped her period at age X, and so periods stop at some point.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So period starts and we call it menarche.
Yeah.
And then a woman will go through her young life, her fertile life, ovulating and blah, blah, blah. But towards the end of our fertile life, that's usually somewhere towards the end of our 40s or early 50s, we reach what is called the menopause. That is the last period. So that is the natural process that women mustn't be anxious or sad or depressed about. It is as natural as the menarche.
They still remain women even after.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now the thing is, what happens then now is that we cease going through that natural process of ovulation, bleeding, ovulation, bleeding. But once it has stopped, it is not normal for it to restart. Okay. When it restarts, it means that, so a woman stops her period. If more than a year after not bleeding, she starts getting what seems to be abnormal periods, it is not normal, because something abnormally is making the lining of the uterus thicken. And possibilities, I like to say, just to send the message home how serious it is, I say, okay, possibilities are 1, there's cancer, 2, cancer, 3, cancer,
Right.
4, cancer,
Right.
5, cancer. So, and then there's the rest.
Yeah.
So when a woman has stopped having a period, she's reached menopause, a whole year has gone by, more than a year has gone by, she bleeds. Please remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it is cancer, cancer until proven otherwise. It is not always cancer, but it is the most serious and the most common that we must make sure is not happening. And that cancer can be cancer from the cervix, the mouth of the womb, or it can be cancer from right inside the uterus. And sometimes it might even be a cancer in the ovaries, which are producing their hormones abnormally again. So it must not be taken lightly.
Yeah.
If you have stopped your periods and more than a year later you bleed, please have it investigated to make sure there is no cancer.
Sure. The one thing we haven't spoken about is what's called post-coital bleeding. Bleeding after sex. Please tell us about that.
Okay, so coitus, simply put, is basically sex.
Right.
Right. So post-coital bleeding is bleeding after having sex.
Right.
So you probably might want to know, is this normal or not?
Should people worry?
Right. So it depends when. So if you are losing your virginity, right, so in other words, you are having your sexual debut, koitaki,
Yeah.
right, it's possible that a woman can bleed because of the breaking of the hymen.
Okay.
But going forward, in the reproductive woman, right, you should not bleed. Why shouldn't you bleed? Because you've got enough hormones in your body to lubricate your vagina.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So the long story, sorry, I'm cutting you because we're running out of time. So essentially, if it happens later on in life, you need to go and consult to make sure that there isn't anything wrong. Well, ladies, it's been such an awesome time I've had with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, thanks
and
for
thank
having
you for the wise words, not only for me, but to all men out there in the public. Well, folks, that's it that we had for you today. And remember that we're back on SABC. We see you next time. Yeah, please. And until then, please do take care. And thank you so much for all the people that send us emails and tweets. I'm Dr. Salamutau. Do take care.
Brilliant score. Imran Tahir produced a superb performance with the ball. The Proteas leg spinner put his side in the driving seat, scalping 3 wickets for just 18 runs.
Gifton Gope is flying toward third, and he is there with a triple, his first in the big leagues.
It is a Ferrari front row lockout, unless Hamilton can get on pole, and he can't. Ferrari, for the first time since France in 2008, have locked out the front row.
For all your sports news, keep it locked to Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday from 20:30.